Hello, you guys. This is Cast, and I'm your host, Cassidy Streeter. This week, we will predicting our Week 15 teams to win. Starting off with Baltimore Ravens visiting the New York Giants. Obviously, a very short road trip. The Baltimore Ravens coming off a bye. The New York Giants playing against the Saints last week and having kind of a doozy of a loss. I don't think it's, any question in my mind that the Ravens will win this game. If they lose this, it's just not a good look for them, going into the end of the season and into the postseason. Plus, they are favored by 16 points. I'm not going to give my 2 cents really. I think that the Ravens need to start clicking on offense. I think that they need to start showing that they are a little bit better on defense after the bye. And hopefully they figure some things out on that front because their defense definitely has been, underperforming compared to last year. And I don't expect them to obviously have the same type of defense that they did last year. It's hard to maintain that. It's just hard to do that season after season, but they do need to do a little bit better if they don't want to be a first round exit based on how they've been playing, here this year in the playoffs. But I am obviously picking the Ravens. I don't think there's really a shot that the Giants upset here. If they do, then I'd be worried about the Ravens and the rest of the season. Moving on, we have Jets Jaguars. Many would have believed that this would be two potential playoff teams before the year. Obviously, with both teams only being 3-10, the playoffs are out of the question, as the AFC has a lot of stacked teams record-wise near the top, and not very many teams that are in the hunt anymore, having more teams eliminated than the NFC at this point. This is an interesting game. They do favor the Jets by 3.5, and ESPN gives them a 61, nearly 62% chance to win this game. But I think the Jaguars defense kind of stepped up last week. They obviously played a division rival in a tough game in the Titans, and the Jets lost, to obviously a better Florida team in the Dolphins last week, which, they did a very good job, honestly, of having a lead and then blowing the lead and then losing in overtime. I think the Jets will win this game for the sole reason that they just have a bit more talent. And we obviously saw Aaron Rodgers' first 300-yard games in years. But I think that the Jets, while they're not really playing for anything, they're trying to still hopefully keep the team together to make a run next year. But very uncertain futures for this team. I feel like the game could go either way, but I'm going with the Jets, barring my better judgment, because I think that they played a lot better than they had last week. And I don't think it's a lot to go on with the Jaguars that they squeaked by in an utterly abysmal scoring game against what has been a lackluster opponent in the Titans this year. Moving on, we have Cowboys Panthers. Obviously, the Cowboys still with very slim chances to make the postseason. This could be the game that really knocks them out of it, though, because the Panthers have been playing very, very well. Last week, the Carolina Panthers, looked very, very good, in their game. Let me see here, against Philadelphia, with a potential to win that game that ultimately came to an end when they couldn't convert on fourth down because of a pass defense by Darius Slay. Now, Dallas has kind of gotten the running game going a little bit. They've played, some good football, but then, they lose Monday Night Football in what was a much more interesting game than I thought it would be against the Bengals. who at that time were a 4-win team. Hard to believe they were only a game ahead of the Lions. Or I mean, sorry, the Panthers last week. Lions, Ron Cat. Um, and they needed a win to keep their slim playoff hopes alive. But Dallas, Carolina, I'd like to say that I think Dallas is going to win, but I'm actually going to pick the upset here. I think that Carolina just has the better QB, and they seem to be playing very, very scrappy football, and I think this is a game that they come away with a win at home against Dallas, ruining their slim playoff hopes. Commanders, Saints. Obviously, the Saints coming off a bye. I'm pretty sure they didn't play last week. Or no, they did play last. I'm sorry. The Commanders not playing last week. Flip that around, you guys. Goodness, I'm sorry. I'm a little out of it, obviously, today. But Washington coming off a bye. I think it's safe to assume that they are not playing for a division title at this point because they are behind the 2-loss Eagles, and they have 5 very slim chances for them to actually take the division back unless the Eagles have a collapse like they did last year at the end of the year. But they're obviously still competing for a playoff spot and holding the 7th seed right now. This, I would say, is an absolutely must win. You do not want to drop to 8-6. That potentially leads the way for other teams, to potentially come out from under you and get within a game of striking distance. So I'm definitely taking Washington in this game. They should be well rested, after the bye. And New Orleans obviously didn't look like anything crazy last week, struggling to put away the Giants with a 14-11 score. So I'm taking Washington. Bengals, Titans. Obviously, the Bengals favored by 5 in this game. They've been cooking a lot. Joe Burrow having a very, very good season. I would say they got somewhat lucky against the Cowboys in the sense that, the Cowboys block a punt and then they screw themselves by going for the ball when it was a tied game. And, Cincinnati obviously didn't put up as many points as they had been in that last game. They still put up a good amount of points, but, they were kind of bailed out. Now, they play Tennessee, who's just been a lackluster team all year. They have competed in various games and, and their defense, performed pretty well at the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, but now they're a really banged up defense. And I think Joe Burrow is just going to feast off of that with Higgins and Chase, obviously. So I'm picking Cincinnati. And I mean, Will Levis is going to have a hell of a game if he's going to compete with Cincinnati. Chiefs, Browns. The Chiefs seemingly, winning another close game last week against the Chargers. The Browns getting handled by Pittsburgh. Obviously, Cleveland had handled Pittsburgh a few weeks prior, but didn't have that same magic that they had, in their first meeting. And the Chiefs, keeping it really close with the Chargers last week, and the Chargers seemingly very close to getting over the hump, to be able to beat the Chiefs. But overall, it was just kind of one of those things that I think the Chiefs, this is a game where they're gonna handle the Browns. The Browns, who, fun team to watch with Jameis Winston, but overall it just looks like he's kind of reverting back to his old tendencies where he's throwing picks, which is just gonna be a boon for Kansas City. Kansas City is only favored by 4, but that might just be because of the nature of every one of their games this year. But I trust them to be able to win against a Browns team that doesn't doesn't look like, they're going to match up well against the pass rush for Kansas City in my eyes. And Jameis is going to be under pressure and needs to be able to not throw a pick in order for them to contend in this game. Dolphins, Texans. Obviously, the Texans in a lackluster division aren't really at risk of losing, that division title at all. I guess you can play a little bit and see if you can move up, a division seeding, but it's highly unlikely. 8-5 is just kind of underperforming for how I think that they thought they would be doing this year. Their line obviously not very good. The Miami Dolphins are fighting for a playoff spot, and they have been playing very well. I personally think, and look at this game, I think that the Miami Dolphins are going to be able to get after. They're going to be able to get after Stroud, and I think that with cornerback Jalen Ramsey, it's going to be very hard. Who's going to match up well? I feel like to Nico Collins. I feel like it's going to be a tough game for the Houston Texans and the Strouds. Now, I think that they'll still compete. Miami's been a little bit lackluster in terms of the run defense, and Mixon's been a man on a mission to prove he's still a very, very serviceable back. And, not just serviceable, but above average running back this year. So unless Miami can, bite Mixon's yards per carry in the butt, I think it's going to be a long day for them. But I do think that, offensively, they could really do well against this Houston Texans pass rush because they have two dynamic pass rushers, but Tua gets rid of the ball very, very quickly. And he has been getting pretty good protection this year. So I'm actually going to take the underdog Dolphins because they have a lot more at stake, with this game than Houston. And obviously Houston is coming off a bye, but I think that Miami just has a lot more at stake, keeping their slim playoff hopes alive with the final 4 games of the season. Moving on to Colts Broncos. The Colts obviously still in a position to make the postseason. Just need to win some games. They're obviously playing the Broncos, who pretty sure they had a bye last week. And if the Broncos win, obviously, it's very, very good for them. That division is very stacked, much like the NFC North, where it's like the Broncos are, I believe they're third. They're third or second, obviously, with the only losing team in the division being the Raiders. But you want to keep winning. You want to potentially move up to that 5 spot because it obviously, there's no, with Kansas City's win last week, they've won the division. They have the only reason they have to play and try to keep winning games is to keep the number 1 seed in the AFC for that bye. But looking at this game, I just think that Denver is a lot more balanced of a team than Indianapolis. And with a player like Anthony Richardson, who's throwing beneath 50%, I just don't think this is a favorable game, for the Colts. So I'm going to go with Denver, especially in Mile High. Patriots Cardinals. Obviously, the Cardinals, losing a game last week against Seattle, where it was kind of like if they win this game, Seattle is kind of lingering around still in that NFC West, and it's still a toss-up for that division. And now you've kind of let the Rams, sneak up and control their own destiny as they've been on a really big, winning streak, here towards the end of the season. And obviously won a doozy of a game last night, with only 4 field goals and no touchdowns scored by either team. But if you don't put away New England in this game, your season is likely over and you're not going to make the postseason. So I'm taking Arizona just because I think that, they have a lot more to play for. It's in Arizona, and New England, while they're coming off a bye, I just don't think they have the talent to keep up with the Cardinals offensively. And I think that one of the major reasons they lost last week because Kyler Murray was off his game and he threw two just bad picks. And I just don't expect that this week against New England and, less shooting themselves in the foot. So I think they come away with a win because of that. Bills Lions, one of the biggest games, of the year so far in terms of talent. The Bills, as we all know, crazy game against the Rams last week. And crazy. The highest scoring game of the year. They are now going up against, I think is still the number one offense with Detroit. They've obviously, in their last game against, the Packers on Thursday night, obviously it wasn't, I guess it was a pretty high scoring game, but lately they haven't been as crazy. Obviously it's in Ford Field, at Detroit, but I do think that the Bills, after that game last week, I think that they're going to be reeling to kind of try and improve themselves and set themselves back on track. The only issue I see with this game, to me, is that the Bills don't have that good of a run defense. And they should know this week that they might have to break their norm of running nickel all the time because, as we all know, Sonic and Knuckles on the Lions, it can be a feast kind of game. And it's like the running game against the Packers last week wasn't very good. They had to resort to a lot of screens to get their running backs action, which worked very well. But you can almost feel that those two guys aren't going to have two off games in a row in terms of actually running the football and having a good ground game. Now, I do think that the Bills' secondary really matches up well against the wide receivers, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra, Tim Patrick. I think that, Rasul Douglas, Teron, I forget his last name, Teron, and then I forget the young corner they have, but I think that overall they match up pretty well in terms of secondary, and Rasul Douglas is obviously somewhat familiar with Amon-Ra a little bit, having been in the on the Packers until last year when he was traded. So, he's going to be able to tell them what to kind of expect because their identity, I wouldn't say, has changed a lot in the last 3 years. They definitely find unique ways to use their players now and that sort of thing, but overall their identity is pound the ball, behind that strong O-line. But I think Buffalo, I do think that they match up very well. I think their D-line is very good. I just think you're going to need to expect their linebackers to have a hell of a game to really limit this running game. But I am going to go with the Lions, even though I think this is, one of their final games in the season where it's, a potentially tough opponent that they could lose against. But I am going with Detroit just because I think they're the best team in the league right now. Moving on, we have Buccaneers Chargers. Obviously, the Buccaneers now in control of their division, with them winning and then the Falcons losing. I guess I can't really show you guys this. But then you also have, okay, so it is the Chargers in second and Denver in third. Chargers must hold a tiebreaker there in their division. Obviously, they're trying to cling to that spot. And at 8-5, it's kind of the same boat as, Denver, where you want to keep winning, you want to hold that tiebreaker, and you don't want to fall a game behind. I do think that Tampa Bay is kind of reeling, but they're playing against a defense that's playing as well as anybody. This is really going to be a test for Baker, who's been throwing a little bit more picks lately. I know that last week one of them was kind of a like, what the heck? That was a pick, a batted ball that happens to float up as the guy is falling back and he catches it. But I think that Baker really needs to clean up and play that ball security late season football. Otherwise, it could be a very early exit in the playoffs, as we know that that turnovers are, that much more amplified, when you're playing in a high stakes game in the postseason and every drive is pivotal. So looking at this game, I am gonna go with the Chargers. I'm thinking that Lad McConkey, comes back and helps his team a little bit. And I do think that they're going to play some scrappy football against this talented wide receiver core with the Buccaneers. But I think it really does come down to Baker, who is still having a great year, a very good year. But you're going up against a team that, might be a little bit better than their record just because of who they've played and the toughness of their division. But the Chargers, I think, are for real, and they have a very good and balanced team with, an elite level quarterback. So I'm going with the Chargers over the Buccaneers, especially at home at SoFi. Moving on, we have Steelers Eagles. Probably the second biggest game of this week, a potential Super Bowl matchup. Don't get me wrong, I'd be kind of unhappy if this was a Super Bowl matchup. Obviously not just because, my Packers wouldn't be in it, but it's like I don't like Russell Wilson. And I think that the Eagles, while they are a good football team, their passing attack hasn't been there, which I think is their Achilles heel. And I think this game is going to really show that. I don't think they're going to be able to run it super, super well against Pittsburgh. I'm glad they're finally going up against a team that is so defensive oriented. And I think that, looking at this team, I think that, even though they're favoring Philadelphia by 5.5 at home, I think that Pittsburgh can come in and snuff this team. I really don't see why, actually. I don't see why Philadelphia's favored so much. Maybe it's an unpopular take, but I think that Pittsburgh is going to have the ability to really force Philadelphia to have to throw it on third down. And they're not going to be getting super close to these, in these short yardage situations where they can just push their way to victory, which, as we all know, has been their bread and butter for years now. So looking at this game, I'm going to take the upset. I think Pittsburgh is better equipped to beat Philadelphia than Philadelphia is to beat Pittsburgh. I think that while Philadelphia might get Russell Wilson some problems, I think that because your kicker is, one of the best in the league and probably the best this year, I think that I forget his name, but the kicker on Pittsburgh, I think, has been the most clutch kicker this year. Boswell, that's his name. Boswell has been a beast of a kicker this year and is responsible for winning them several games. All I think about is the 6 field goal game that they won earlier this year, and I'm like, you need to have the mentality of a champion kicker to make 6 in a game. I don't even, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to take Pittsburgh because I also think that they're going to be able to run the football against Philadelphia, who, weren't doing the best against the run last week. I know that Chuba Hubbard's average per carry wasn't the greatest, but there were times that he was getting good chunk plays. And this week, you're going up against who I would say right now is a better running back than Chuba, Najee Harris. But they also have, Jalen Warren, who is also very good, that I think, they could get incorporated into this. And what better way to really silence the Philadelphia fans by, stopping their run game with Saquon and then having a run game of your own that is just going to keep getting first downs and really calming the crowd and bumming them out that their team is unable to stop the run. So I'm going with Pittsburgh. And, hopefully they don't let me down, to be honest with you. Packers Seahawks, Sunday Night Football. Obviously, my Packers visiting, the state of so many crazy things throughout the years. Hail Mary, and even the team that it's like came into Lambeau and beat us and had an onside and beat us that way. Goodness, I don't know what to say other than that it always worries me when we go play Seattle. They're a completely different team now. I would say that their secondary, while it might not be the second coming of the Legion of Boom, it's the best secondary they've had since Legion of Boom. And looking at this game, it just seems like kind of a bait. They give ESPN Analytics gives my Packers, just under 63% chance to win. But then, the game odds are 2.5 point favorites to my Packers, which isn't very much. I'll say this. I'm gratified by how we played the run last week because, as we all know, Charbonnet had a clinic last week against the Cardinals. And while the Cardinals, they're not the most talented defense, I don't think they've really been pushovers this year either. So, obviously, looking at this game, the thing that I'll say, and this has been kind of true all year, is that I hope Matt LaFleur feeds Jacobs. The Seahawks, per what I looked at, have the second worst run defense in terms of runners that run between the tackles. And I think that Jacobs, I think he leads the league on carries between the tackles or something like that. He's like first or second or something like that. So I'm saying it. Feed Jacobs, who has been doing well lately. I feel like against the Lions, we didn't run enough with him. I don't think we were patient enough with him. The Lions obviously kind of stacked the box and were like, yeah, we're not letting you do this on first down to us. But Seattle, I just hope that LaFleur has some creative play calling that if they do the same thing that the Lions did, where it looks like they're stacking the box, Love or LaFleur can call, an option for him to audible out of that play. And if that's the case, I think that my Packers, with the talent that we have at wide receiver, at running back, the O-line doing very well in the passing game. I know it wasn't the greatest last week. Love under a good amount of pressure, only getting sacked once. But overall, I think that, this is a game that my Packers rebound. They get to 10 wins, ultimately kind of solidifying their spot in the playoffs. And the Seahawks, obviously, trying to hold on to their division, only, not even technically really being a game ahead of the Rams just because the Rams beat them earlier this year and they play yet again later in this year. So they are playing with a win now mentality, as I'm sure, McDonald is telling them. And that's going to make it a doozy of the game. I am picking my Packers because I think, there's there's a possibility that Jair Alexander comes back, which helps the secondary. And of course, we need him, against Jackson Smith-Njigba, DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett, and hopefully the run game, and then even Edgerton and Cooper, I think potential to play. I think that the my Packers are getting a little bit healthier, and I hope that the middle of the field isn't such a weakness, this time around, or it could be a long day again for my Packers. So I'm going with my Packers over Seattle in Sunday Night Football, and go Pack go on that. Now, double header for Monday night. We got the Vikings hosting the Bears. The Bears, obviously, under Eberflus, they hadn't won a Sunday, or they hadn't won, or dash that. I am not going to say what I was going to say. They haven't, they are 0-6 on away. I know that last week they looked even worse against the Niners. A Niners team that looked pretty good, and enough so that it's like, oh, they were favored over the Rams last night, but couldn't really do that much offensively. So looking at this game, I'm going with the Vikings, of course, because Caleb Williams has been sacked more than any other quarterback this year. And the the Vikings rushing attack is no joke. And I think that's really all that needs to be talked about with this game. And then moving on to Falcons Raiders, a really doozy of a game. For Monday night, I could care less. I feel like I could miss this game and I could be like, well, who cares? Because it's, overall, it's like, the Falcons could have a rebound game against a team like the Raiders, who just lost to the Buccaneers, and but there's always the possibility that Desmond Ridder against his former team maybe goes, improves, and says, maybe you shouldn't have gotten rid of me. Maybe it was the scheme. Maybe it was, the bad offensive play calling or something like that. Or maybe Atlanta's just cursed because they have all the weapons and they apparently got a QB that was supposed to pull them away from throwing a lot of picks. And then look at Kirk Cousins. Most picks the last like 4 games or something like that. They got worse after their bye week, which just is so weird to do. And they're only favored by 4 in this game. And obviously, you look at the Raiders and I'm like, oh, maybe Crosby can get under Kirk's skin, in this game. So I am going with the Falcons because I feel like you'd have to be a fool to bet on a 2-11 team, but could be interesting. Could be one of these kind of doozy flops of a game. But with that being said, those are all the games this week. Obviously, 15 games predicted. I had obviously done a separate video for Thursday Night Football where I guess you could say that I got lucky, with the Rams winning because that game could have went either way last night. But, full slate of games should be, there are several really fun ones, that I think everyone's going to want to watch. Obviously, Lions, Bills, Eagles, Steelers, naming some of the notable ones. Even my, Packers, Seahawks could, be a potentially really, be a really, good game. Obviously, the history and the historical endings, arc of those two teams, the last, 15 years or so now, maybe not 15, but last 14, 13, 14 years or whatever. But, if you guys have any comments, thoughts, I would love to hear them down in the comments. But as always, this is Cast, and go Pack go.